The paper title is Leadership of EU Member States in Building Carbon Footprint Regulation and Their Role in Promoting Circular Building Design. This paper is co-authored with Maria Santos, Mohib Al-Obaidi, Mariam Baskar, and myself, Shiliat. Well, the aim of this study was to assist the European Commission to identify the policies that support the uptake of circular building and carbon neutrality. And the research question was mainly to what extent are carbon neutrality and circularity concepts integrated in mandatory building regulation, and who are the leading countries in this regard. Well, the research methodology focused on a systematic review for existing regulations, and we screened 27 member states with a focus on Denmark, Finland, France, Netherlands, and Sweden as a result of our screening phase, because it popped out directly after the screening that those countries have already in place regulations that are requiring life cycle assessment, environmental code of declarations. They have mandatory requirements to increase the service life cycle, and definitely the procurement process is also part of it. We excluded the criteria related to the urban and territorial scale, and the principle of triangulation was used to validate our findings of this study. Well, what are the results of our study? Allow me to share with you the 5 leading countries according to our study. It's mainly number 1, Denmark, followed by Finland, Sweden, France, and the Netherlands. And in the coming slide, I will start to discuss with you why this. In fact, the regulation landscape, as you can see, I would like to start with Denmark, is advanced relatively with policies and tools that aim to waste, waste reuse and material separation. For example, Copenhagen is one of the leading European capitals that achieved the lowest emissions per capita of 2.5 tons per capita. In second place, we can find Finland that advanced in decarbonizing design by balancing carbon emissions to sink and storage. They are really obsessed with the concept of building as a storage of CO2. Finland is promoting already a wood architecture and promoting a landscape design that is embedding the circular economy principle, urban metabolism, and sustainable financing of carbon neutrality. And Finland also succeeded to strengthen its local identities and cultural resilience through sustainable wood architecture. As you can see, there are some figures under Finland that are indicating that there are concrete measures. Coming in the third place, Sweden. Sweden has progressive climate legislation that supports the transition towards a carbon neutral Sweden by 2045, 5 years ahead of the European Union. And they are effective from January 2022. And Sweden aims to recycle 70% of the construction residues. And this is one of the most ambitious legislation that we found in our review. Moving to the fourth and the last 5th country, France is number 4. It has a very interesting carbon footprint reduction legislation, RE 2021 or RE 2021, even though it's still not published, but we got access to the current draft, which are very promising, and they have very interesting thresholds of 4 kilograms of CO2 operational emissions, equivalent per square meter of construction. And they are also pushing to have a dynamic LCA approach into calculation. And finally, I move to the Netherlands that has already a mandatory requirement for implementing LCA for all newly built construction. And definitely they have an ambitious plan with the phasing out of natural gas, and some municipalities, based on personal initiatives, they are having circular green public procurement protocols that are already implemented in place. Well, coming to the conclusion of my presentation of today, I can say that I have some recommendations. The first recommendation is that EU member states must adopt measures to limit carbon emissions and the carbon incorporated in products based on the European standard EN 15978 and the levels framework that was published last year. Despite that it is not addressing aspects of circularity, it can be considered as a vehicle or a lever to make sure that on the European level there is an understanding of the different aspects of circularity, and it will be very beneficial if the level rating or the level framework can be translated into rating systems, local national rating system, or coupled to existing ones in relation to green public procurement and to circularity. Also, the use of wooden building as carbon sinks and storage is gaining more and more momentum in the 5 investigated countries, and carbon emissions from heating are already very low in Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands and Finland. So this approach of district heating and heat pumps use is promoting this idea of having a carbon neutral country. And I'm not talking about something that will happen. I'm talking about something that has already been happening since the year 2017 in most of the 5 investigated countries. Now moving to recommendation group 2, circularity criteria in general for buildings should be treated in isolation from carbon neutrality. Should not be, they should not be treated in isolation from carbon neutrality. From our review, we found them totally separated. In fact, the circularity criteria must be coupled to carbon footprint reduction measures. And as a consequence, timber construction materials and biosourced insulation material will be in great demand. The current supply chain of timber is already under pressure in Europe, and the availability of wood sourced from sustainably managed forests will not be enough to meet the European demand in the coming years. Moreover, the number of trained workers who can deliver timber construction projects is not sufficient across the EU, and the training of professionals, including architects, masons, electricians, plumbers, will require significant investment to prepare them to design and build timber construction. Coming to the last recommendation of my presentation of today, well, EU member states must increase the share of recycled and reused construction waste and the possibility of separating the materials for future reuse, and this has to be translated into the regulation. None of the investigated countries addressed this matter thoroughly, except Sweden. Timber and biosourced material will not cover the demand supply during the coming 20 years, therefore increasing the share of recycled and reused construction material and embedding thresholds and requirements in the existing legislation landscape will be very important. Some final closing remarks for the presentation of today. The European housing market is under pressure in Europe, and we need more and more housing units. There's already a good, clear housing supply gap in the European Union. What we will need to do with the pressure of stopping urbanization and the reuse of land is to have regulations that enforce and couple circularity and carbon neutrality paradigms in order to intensify the challenge of building sustainably. I invite you to read the paper. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this interesting overview of at least some member states in the European Union. Thank you very much for the interesting talk. When we